So I've already made this statement before about, Mark Carney and the Canadian government recognizing Palestine, that it's way too late to acknowledge, like you're basically confirming that a pile of rubble, that a humanitarian crisis, the famine and starving of innocent children and mothers and uh sons and fathers, that, wiping out an entire population. Now you're going to recognize it as a state after all the significant damage has been done, knowing full forth that Israel has already confirmed they're at their final leg of the entire takeover, that there's not going to be a Palestinian state, that they're at the final mark, they're pursuing further action into destroying the rest of Palestine, going into the West Bank, going into Lebanon, going into Syria, to again further the Zionist prophecy of the greater Israeli project. It had nothing to do with the hostages and nothing to do with October 7th. We stated that clear as day. We have kept repeating that argument because the evidence is already there. We have shown you articles from Israeli publications that have also concluded with those rhetoric, and we have shown extensive evidence, but yet people still want to chime in on this manufactured narrative that purposely is done to the West to fearmonger and propagandize people that, no, it's about the hostages, about October 7th, that you're awarding terrorists. Which, that's not the case. That awarding Palestinian statehood and allowing for a two-state solution, that's not awarding terrorists. That if you're awarding the Palestinian statehood, then obviously they would not allow for Hamas to immediately assume position of power to take over Palestine. That's not what happens there. But I've already expressed in detail about that. Here is Mark Carney, because they had a UN assembly about this. Here's Mark Carney speaking at the UN on why he believes at this point, and again, I've stated this before, it's way too late. It's kind of hypocritical that you're now acknowledging the state of Palestine after, the devastation that's been done to it. This is why he believes that now is the time to recognize the state of Palestine. So listen to his remarks.
Since 1947, it has been the policy of every Canadian government to support a two-state solution for lasting peace in the Middle East.
So he's saying that since 1947, it's been the Canadian policy to have a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine. So why did you not mention this before? Why did you wait till now to recognize Palestine as a state? Why did you wait till now? You could have even said before October 7th, but you didn't say that. You did not say that. The Canadian government never said anything about this. So why did you choose now to recognize Palestine, which is now pretty much rubble, unlivable space that is completely bombed and deteriorated? Why are you now recognizing a state of Palestine?
This position envisioned the creation of a sovereign, democratic, and viable state of Palestine, building its future in peace and security alongside the state of Israel. Over many decades, Canada's commitment to this goal was premised on the expectation that this outcome would be eventually achieved as part of a negotiated settlement.
Really? Because we have been showing that particularly this government in Canada was trying to advance more warfare. That they were paying Israel, they were using tax dollars to aid military funds to Israel. That they wanted the continuation of this genocide. But yet he's saying that it's the Canadian value to have a two-state solution. You're talking two sides at the same mouth. You're saying that you recognize a two-state solution, you want peace, you want negotiation. At the same time, you have made deals with weapons manufacturers to send arms to Israel to keep the war going. So what is it? Do you want to keep the war going, or do you want negotiations and settle this in a two-state solution? What is it? Which way are we going? Mark Carney does not address that.
Regrettably, this possibility has been steadily and gravely eroded, including by the pervasive threat of Hamas terrorism to Israel and its people, culminating in the heinous attack of October 7th. The accelerated building of settlements across the West Bank and East Jerusalem and the soaring settler violence against Palestinians. Actions such as the E1 settlement plan and the Israeli government's contribution to the humanitarian disaster.
And just to remind people, it's been a humanitarian disaster since 1947. It's been a humanitarian disaster when it was hijacked. This territory was hijacked by Zionists, by British elites to storm in and take over this territory, which led to the Nakba, which led to the removal of Palestinians out of their homeland and displacing them, and just kept going and going and going. They've, Israel built this Iron Dome, this mass surveillance system. Even Charlie Kirk has stated, Charlie Kirk, who's a very fanatical fan of Israel, has stated it's a fortress. It's a fortress. They have AI weaponization surveillance technology to track and drone anybody who they please is a threat. And this has been going on for decades. So while I have to give credit to the fact that, yes, they recognize Palestine, finally, but why they wait till now? Why'd they wait till all this time when they know that there's no way that it's already been stated, Benjamin Netanyahu is not going to have a negotiation, period. He's already bombed Qatar when Hamas and the United States and Qatar were having a negotiation to release the hostages. Israel bombed them. They have violated every single one of their ceasefire agreements. They have violated every single one of their opportunities to release hostages. And even Netanyahu himself, his government, have already stated that they don't care about the hostages. They rather see them dead in the arms of Hamas than rescue them, because it gives further opportunity for the whole reason for this is to take over Palestine, to take over that region for the Greater Israeli Project, to reign superior over that territory. Zionist is a superior cult, and it's a death cult. And that's why this is happening. And you've had since 1947, this government has that since 1947 to address this. It's just absolutely hilarious that at this moment, Mark Carney is making statements about like, oh, Canada always had this reputation of a two-state solution. Really? Really? So you waited till after Palestine's been destroyed, after Gaza has been wiped out, after Benjamin Netanyahu already announced that there's never, ever going to be a Palestinian state. You wait till then to finally address this.
Gaza. Hamas
sows terror among the Israeli people and has oppressed the people of Gaza. That has prompted us to take the position we have. Hamas must absolutely release all hostages, disarm fully, and never play any role in the future governance of Palestine.
Again, we've already stated this had nothing to do with the hostages. Hamas was paid by Israel. Israel paid Qatar to pay Hamas to enact this October 7th situation purposely to ignite a war against Palestine because they don't want Palestinians. They want them eliminated. They want a complete takeover of the territory. They want an ethnic cleansing. This has been going on since 1947. And it was written years even prior to that. It was detailed. It was always their intention to wipe out this population, take over Middle Eastern territories, and reign superior to anyone else, even Jewish people. You want to say that's a safe space for the Jewish people? Jewish people don't feel safe in Israel. Christians don't feel safe in Israel. Catholics don't feel safe. And definitely not Arabs or Hindus or any other religion. If you are not a full-fledged Zionist 100%, they deem you as an unwanted traitor, as a terrorist in their eyes. That's because they've been programmed and mind-controlled over generations. This has been going on since 1947, but now in 2025, as they're coming to their last resolution, the last results, now we can finally recognize Palestine as a state. Now we can say that, Canada's always had this idea of a two-state solution. It's absolutely gross. And that's why I reject Mark Carney's statement about this. It's not because I'm now against Palestine. I've always, been supportive of not having this violence and, thinking about all the people that have starved and died and just the chaos that ensued over there. But the fact they're announcing this at this point is absurd. They had every opportunity to do beforehand, even after October 7th. They had every opportunity to do so. But now that they know that there's no possibility that outcome is going to happen, what, now you're just going to announce it? We want a two-state solution. Yeah, it's so hypocritical. Anyway, but the reason I want to show you this is because Development Canada released this tweet and says, Canada is one of the largest donors to the humanitarian response in Palestine. We continue to support civilians, including through emergency funding, nutrition, field hospitals and healthcare, clean water, and shelter. They also continue to say, yet the severity and scale of the crisis mean that much more support is needed. Canada continues to urgently call for the rapid scaling up of humanitarian assistance. Canada remains committed to supporting the response and to helping communities rebuild their lives. So it sounds, promising. That sounds like Canada, that we're helping to support people. But here's where, again, I point out the hypocrisy. I point out the double-sided bullshit that comes out of this, because at the same time, when Development Canada is pleading with people about how important it is to keep up with humanitarian aid, the Canadian government is paying Israel to keep this war going. So here's from the Maple, where it says, Canada's arms to Israel scandal explained, a timeline of Canada's exports to Israel and the Liberal government's attempts to make the scandal disappear. The Maple has spent the past 22 months paying close attention to Canadian military exports to Israel and the Liberal government's misleading and sometimes outright false comments on the issue. Unlike the United States, Canada does not donate military aid to Israel. However, private companies can sell military goods to Israel by applying for an export permit from the federal government. Canada is a signatory of the Arms Trade Treaty, which enshrines in the Export and Import Permits Act. Under this law, Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs must not approve export permits for military goods if there is a substantial risk the goods could be used to facilitate serious human rights abuses or violations of international law. But they did it anyway. So these are people that are talking out both sides of their mouths. They're saying that what's happening in Gaza is a humanitarian crisis. At the same time, we're giving weapons to the people that are causing the crisis. Most exports to the United States, however, do not require a permit. Some Canadian goods sold to the United States may be transferred or redirected to other countries, including Israel, through military aid or foreign military sales. Since October 7, 2023, and despite some restrictions, Canadian companies have continued to sell military goods directly to Israel. Some companies have also been named the U.S. military contracts that identified Israel as an end user of the goods. Below is a considered timeline of those exports in the Liberal government's deceptive attempts to make the scandal disappear. So I'm not going to read through all of this because it's very lengthy, but I just want to note some of the highlights of this. So from 2012 to 2022, Canadian arms exports to Israel surge tenfold in 10 years. So this was before October 7th. Before October 7th, Canadian companies sold a high of $26 million of goods to Israel. But according to Mark Carney, the Canadian government has always stood up for Palestinians. They look at human atrocities. They look at the violations of human rights and abuses and violations of international law. So why would you give $26 million of military goods to a military, to a colonization that's violating international law and has been doing it since 1947? Why are you doing this? Why are you talking out both sides of your mouth? And now trying to squeam in that you recognize Palestine after all this. October 2023, Israel begins assault on Gaza. Following the Hamas-led attacks on October 7, 2023, Israel launches a brutal assault on Gaza. Within days, scholars and human rights activists warn that Israel's war has been the hallmarks of a genocidal campaign. Activists call for greater transparency regarding Canada's military exports to Israel and renewed demands for an immediate embargo. Did that happen? No. They kept it going. They kept it going. It says, as a signatory of the Arms Trade Treaty, Canada is obligated to block arms exports if there is a substantial risk that they could be used to commit serious rights abuses. But they kept going. They kept going. December 2023, first misdirection on arms permits. Officials in the Trudeau government begin what will be a series of misleading statements regarding military exports to Israel. On December 6th, an assistant deputy minister tells a standing committee in Parliament that no new arms export permits to Israel have been authorized since October 7th and that no Canadian goods are being used in Gaza. So they lied to Parliament. They lied to Parliament because behind closed doors, they were still giving permits in secret to Israel because Israel was buying all of our ammunition, buying all of our military goods, having secret deals with military contractors in this country. Here's January 15, 2024, first 100 days. In late December, South Africa submits its case to the International Court of Justice accusing Israel of committing a genocide in Gaza. By the 100th day of its attacks, Israel has killed over 24,000 Palestinians, leading the United Nations to suggest the war on Gaza could be the 21st century's deadliest 100 days. By now, Canada has voted for a UN motion calling for a ceasefire, but has not publicly declared any intention to block military exports to Israel. Again, talking out of both sides of their mouth. You care so much about humanitarian aid, but yet you're not going to actually take the action, the viable action needed to assist in that, which means stop funding Israel. Cut off the funds. Cut off the funds to this war. That is how you're going to achieve peace. That is how you're going to achieve the ability to stop this. But Canada kept going with this. Canada kept going while saying that they were committed to following through with this international court order and calling it a genocide. Here's January 30th, 2024. Trudeau government admits it authorized new exports. So they lied to you. They then told you that we're going to follow through with the international court order by South Africa to demonize this as genocide. So they know how bad it is. They know it's a violation of human rights. It's an atrocity. They know it's violating international law. They still went with new contracts. They still kept going. After weeks of questions from the Maple and human rights activists, the Trudeau government now admits it has authorized new military export permits to Israel since October 7th. February 10th, 2024, the Maple obtains data showing $28.5 million in new permits. So this is how Canada is secretly becoming a militarized, bloodthirsty cult of its own. You know, we continue to look at America as being bloodthirsty because the military-industrial complex has definitely played a factor in their policies and foreign affairs. Canada's no different. But the difference is that Canada tries to keep it secret because it won't announce direct military aid, unless it's Ukraine. They're very vocal about that. But they won't directly announce that we're sending military aid to Israel, but they'll allow for companies in partnership with the government to receive new contracts. Which is a very much so a conflict of interest to this country. From February to March of 2024, protests and political pressure. Over the next month, activists organized protests and blockades at buildings belonging to arms companies across Canada. February to March, legal challenges underway. Meanwhile, a legal challenge against the Liberal government's authorizations of military exports to Israel is underway. A second one is filed in November. A United Nations experts released a statement calling out all countries, including Canada, to stop arms exports to Israel. So the UN, that again, Canada, Mark Carney announced that we're supportive of the UN, we're supportive of international law and humanitarian crisis. Directly calls out Canada. And we still continue on going behind their backs, going behind Canadians' backs in supporting this genocide. March 18, 2024, Parliament votes to end arms exports to Israel. An unnamed source tells the Toronto Star that the Liberal government stopped authorizing new military export permits to Israel on January 8th. Then on March 18th, Parliament passes a watered-down and non-binding motion that, among other demands, calls for an end to the further authorization and transfer of arms to exports to Israel, but has quickly revealed that this pause will not apply to permits authorized before January 8th. In other words, some military exports to Israel will be allowed to continue. So what they're saying is, prior to January 8th, any contract that they've already drawn up, they could still go with this. They could still give arms to Israel, but they can't do any more new contracts. So, again, this is all just absolutely hypocritical. March 2024, pause does not apply to arms purchases. So they made it watered down purposely to give this loophole. It is also clear that the Liberal government will continue to buy weapons from Israeli armed companies. The Department of National Defense is going ahead with plans to buy $43 million of type of Israeli missile flagged by human rights groups over its use in Israel's past and present bombing campaigns in Gaza. So instead of supplying them with weapons, we're now buying their weapons and giving them cash. This is the loophole that they gave to Israel. They purposely gave to Israel, even though they told the Canadian public and lied to you that we were done funding them, that we're not going to give them ammunition, we were not going to give any more support to Israel. How about this? April 1st, April Fool's Day, Israel kills Canadian veteran and aid worker in Gaza. On April 1st, Israeli forces deliberately kills 7 World Central Kitchen aid workers in Gaza. One of them being Jacob Flixinger, was a Canadian citizen and a military vet. They deliberately targeted this organization. And Israel claimed it was a mistake. But they had authority to be there. They had all the signs. You could see that their vans, their shelter, everything had identified as the World Central Kitchen. And they were still targeted. Why? Because this World Central Kitchen was helping Palestinians. And they killed a Canadian citizen, a veteran. And Canada still kept going on with this. 2023 export report shows record sales. Up to $30.6 million of goods to Israel. Existing permit left $94 million loophole. That's from July. Here's summer. Death toll reaches 40. Death toll hits 40,000. Aid groups renew embargo calls. The American loophole. So it goes on and on, ladies and gentlemen. Here's Foreign Minister Malaysia Lee responding and trying to cover up the fact that Canada violated its own agreements, that they're going behind closed doors to keep funding Israel. New U.S. contracts, the Iron Dome exemption, starvation and slaughter, $18.9 million in military exports. So they recognize that it's a humanitarian crisis, the starvation and slaughter, but they're going to get more weapons. They're going to get more weapons to keep this going. $37.2 million in new exports and a new message. June, July of 2025. Arms embargo now report. Foreign Minister Ahmed replies. The exports continue. And there you go, folks. So, Mark Carney announcing that at the UN and making statements about how we recognize Palestine as a state while this continues on is absolutely absurd. And the fact that they're paying both sides of this war to keep this going on and making statements about how we're serving the needs of Palestinians, how we're serving the needs of a humanitarian crisis, while continuing to arm the people responsible for causing a humanitarian crisis, is absurd. It's absolutely absurd. So I don't recognize Mark Carney making recognition of the Palestinian state. And I think he's doing this intentionally to cover up the fact that Canada's been complicit. Canada is definitely in many aspects in fault with this, much like the United States, much like Israel, much like all the other countries that are talking both sides of their mouths. And there needs to be further explanation and there needs to be further investigation to come to detail on how much has been paid, how much intel, how much they pursued to further facilitate this genocide than preventing. And like I said, this goes as far back as 1947. This is not new. This has nothing to do with October 7th. This goes as far deep into the British elite, the Rothschilds, the Bankers Association, all the people involved in the Zionist fascist coalition trying to take and siege the territory of Palestine for themselves. And that's why so many people, Holocaust survivors, Jewish rabbis, so many people have been calling this out. And it's not because they're anti-Semitic. In fact, what we're doing is anti-Semitic. We're attacking Semites in Palestine deliberately. And the fact that Canada can apply for a neo-Nazi twice in Parliament while stating that they care about Jewish civilians and they care about, the rise of it's all crap. It's all hypocritical crap. And don't believe a word they say. Follow the money, follow the investigations, and realize that these are nefarious ghouls that don't give a crap about anything and are doing this deliberately to slide by and scheme up some, derision to distract us from the fact that they're still continuing on these crimes.